Good evening, and welcome to this regular meeting of the Helotes City Council. It's February 8th, 2018, and we're underway at 7 p.m. And before we get started on the agenda, we have a bunch of scouts here in the room. Troop 655. They meet at the Helotes Church of Latter-day Saints right down here on 1560 on Iron Horse Way. I'd like to welcome you guys. You're working on citizenship and what? Community merit badges. So just as we always do, if you stick around for the whole meeting, you get extra credit. And after the meeting, if you have questions, the council members that are here or I will be glad to answer your questions and everything. So the meeting should go fairly quickly, but we'll wait and see. Okay, on the agenda, we have our invocation, and tonight Councilmember Blue will handle that. And then we have the Pledge of Allegiance to the American and Texas flag. So if you would please stand for the invocation and pledges.
Heavenly Father, as we gather here this evening, we are thankful for your presence as we contemplate issues that will help to shape the future of our community. Help us to strike the right balance between the short-term and the long-term needs of our city so that we don't put one before the other. We ask for guidance as we work through tonight's agenda items. We also ask that you protect our police, firefighters, and all of our public servants as they work daily to make our community better for all of us. And finally, we ask that you provide guidance to our elected officials at all levels, that they keep the citizens first in every decision they make. This we ask in your holy name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible. Okay, next up is our citizens to be heard. Selena, I'm taking it nobody signed up to speak?
Correct.
Right, good. And next is our consent agenda. And for you guys, a consent agenda in our kind of a meeting is just a grouping together of several agenda items that the staff and I consider to be routine city business, and we present it to the council in that way as a group, hoping to get a motion in a second. However, if any of them have a question about any of the items that we can answer it quickly, we will do that. Otherwise, they can ask to have an item pulled, and then that'll go into the bottom part of the agenda, and it'll be discussed by itself. So I would ask council now, are there any questions or requests to pull any of the items 3 through 6 on tonight's consent agenda?
I've got a comment on number 6.
Okay.
I didn't get a chance to thank, Rick, was that you and Susan that worked on it, or just you? On policies and procedures for purchasing?
It was staff.
It was staff. Well, I'd like to thank the staff, because that was a lot of work. And I didn't get a chance to thank you the last time, and I went over and it looks very good to me. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, hearing no request to pull an item, I'll call for a motion and a second to approve consent agenda items 3 through 6.
I make a motion we approve consent agenda items 3 through 6.
I have a motion from Byes. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Second from Massey. So with a motion from Byes, a second from Massey to approve consent agenda items 3 through 6, no discussion required. I'll call the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. That takes us to item number 7. Item number 7 is discussion of and action on a request by SK&A Architecture for approval of a conceptual design plan for the Holtz Retail Shell Building located at 14789 Old Bandera Road here in Helotes. So if I can have a motion and a second, open discussion.
Mayor, I make a motion we discuss item 7.
Have a motion
And
from
take action.
Byes,
I'll second it.
second from Blue. Okay, Bert, it's your motion.
Okay. Well, I called the mayor earlier on the, I'm looking at the schematic, or I guess the drawings of the front, side, and back of the building. it didn't state to me what was, the exterior was made out of, and I was told it's hardy board,
Yes.
so that's allowed. I had a quick question. Are metal buildings allowed in Old Town? Or is that a broad question?
That's a broad question.
Okay.
I mean, they have. to
Let's
go
say this
through-
building would have been made the sides and back, and, you know, that doesn't have the wainscot on, would have been metal. Would that have made code? Good question.
That would have been up to the discretion of the P and Z and city council.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, because you got to keep in mind, too, a lot of metal buildings can be completely covered with an outside
see.
veneer of some kind. You wouldn't know they're a metal building, the way they're shown from the street.
I guess the next question I have is, P and Z recommended going from, I don't know how it was determined, but there's 70% impervious cover there now, and they made a compromise or something to reduce it to 60%. How are we going to, if we decide to go that route, how are you going to figure that? I mean, how do we even know there's 70% there now? Did somebody go out there and measure it, or? That's the question I have there. And then the last one, I don't see the owner's not here, right?
No.
No? Okay. I was just going to propose to him that since the back of the building and the side, a lot of it is going to be seen by the shops in Helotes and the gardens. I know it's going to be expensive, but just maybe ask him if he wouldn't mind extending the wainscot around the building, because the shops are going to be seeing the back of it, and I don't know if that's going to be, you know, that pleasant to look at. I know it's going to be a large expense probably, but if it could just be asked, if he would consider it. And that's all I had.
Actually, just thinking about the hardy board would look very similar to most of the buildings in the shops, which are cedar siding.
Okay.
So it-
Well, I know now it's hardy board, that's fine. I thought it was going to be a metal building by the way it looked.
It's all hardy.
But I mean, if we could just maybe, I wish he was here, I would just say if he would consider the wainscot going all the way around the building. I know that's not really our call, but I just wanted a consideration. That's all I had.
Alex?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With regard to the couple different items that Councilmember Baez indicated and also was discussed at length by Planning and Zoning, the idea of the impervious cover is, as you may know, the Old Town area has a limit on 47.5% of the property, the entire property. The architect was present at the Planning and Zoning meeting and basically admitted he has no idea how much impervious cover. There's a lot of concrete there. What they are indicating is that, of course, this is the building that burnt down a year and some ago, and so they're actually going to be replacing the new building in the area where the old buildings, which were kind of like a hodgepodge of a collection of little buildings put together, and it's going to be a lot smaller than the other buildings were. But they were wanting originally to kind of leave all the concrete there and just make a lot of parking spaces out of it. I think our city administrator measured like 37 of them when the square footage of the building at a minimum needs 10 to 20 different spaces. I think Planning and Zoning was concerned based on where this is located and the fact that we do have a requirement to not provide impervious cover through that much of the property. Even if it was there, the building burning down and being reused for some different purpose means they have to comply with the code. So Planning and Zoning was saying, well, 70 is quite a lot. It's quite a bit. And they kind of went to a 60 number and really didn't want to specify, we'll take out 6 parking spaces or 2 parking spaces or move this driveway or whatever, but to try to maybe have a few islands in the property, and that would be where they would do that. The architect was present and said, well, if you need me to reduce it, I can. I'd rather not reduce it and then replace it with pervious cover, which is very expensive. He said I would just put islands in there and plant other stuff. So he seemed amenable to it. You know, obviously his first choice would be don't do anything with the pavement, but Planning and Zoning felt very strongly that it should at least try to comply with that because of where it's located. The second thing that was on here, that Planning and Zoning, I think we need to address it only just if we want to concur with what they are, and that is to require that all the exterior lighting be full cutoff. Because the way the original paperwork was presented, it had multiple options, and they said, here's our lighting, but it never identified which one of the outside lights on the building would be used. But one of the options on that paperwork was full cutoff, and so they designated full cutoff to be sure, all the way around the building, front included, met the city code, and especially in an area like Old Town where its neighbor is a wedding venue, the last thing you want is bright light shining in any direction, even off the back of the building. I would concur with Planning and Zoning's recommendation for this. I would also note, if you look at the pictures, the color scheme is off. It's not purple like the pictures look like. It's going to be kind of a brownish type of color, so it doesn't look near as bad as the photos identified. That's what I have. Thank you, sir.
Cynthia?
Do we know what they're going to be using the building for?
It's mixed use as far as I understood when we met with them. It'll be retail and professional.
Okay, because before, wasn't it a gym? But they're not going to
Well,
be,
it's been many things through the years, but yeah, last tenant
before-
was CrossFit, and I believe a church was meeting in there also.
so that's not going to be happening anymore?
I have no idea, but it doesn't sound like it because this is going to be some specific, I think it's 5 or 6 specific
Specific.
spaces.
Spaces, okay. Yeah, I was a little, it looks extremely plain, the back parts of it, you know, it's just kind of there. But the front part looks nice. I mean, it's got the, and when you're talking about the wainscoting, you're talking about putting the brick all the way around? Is that what you meant? The
Yeah, the rock, the same as
It's
it's
rock.
in.
Up 36 inches.
Yeah.
So
Well,
they'd
that
have
would
to,
cer-
they'd have to add a brick lug to the back of the slab and then put the rock up.
Yeah, well, it would certainly look nicer. I don't, I just, you know, but you're right, it would be more expensive for them. And if, you know, in this case, I also agree with Planning and Zoning's 60% impervious cover recommendation, and of course, the cutoff. So I'm not going to argue about the way the building looks, because as the mayor said, there are a lot of buildings there in that little area that kind of look the same. They have straight backs. They don't have the rock all the way around. And it doesn't, it's actually quite a lot better than the one that was there. So, I mean, I'm not going to complain about that. So I'm fine with it, with the recommendations that the Planning and Zoning made.
I was just curious, Alex, did Planning and Zoning actually look at square footage when they were talking 60 versus 70 on the impervious cover?
They didn't do the math on that, and it wasn't brought up exactly.
Okay.
I
'cause-
did the math in the audience, but I can't speak at their meeting, so.
Okay, yeah. Well, I did the math too, and just that 10% is just over 4,800 square feet, which is going to be more than just a few islands scattered through there.
Yeah.
So the concern that I have, just thinking about it, not understanding the impact on parking spaces and other things, I would say we'd want to be careful by dropping the impervious cover that much below what it is now, that then they might have to come back and ask for a variance on parking spaces or something. So that, I don't know that that would happen, but to me, 5,000 square feet is a pretty good chunk of space. That's essentially a 50 by 100 space, so that's just my thinking on that.
We did address because Planning and Zoning was discussing with them the number of spaces, and the question, they didn't have the math part of it, because I had done that, because 1.106 acres is a little over 48,000 square feet, and I
Right.
did all that part.
Right.
But they were talking about how many spaces, not realizing that there's, and then the architect basically said, well, truly, we don't know where the end of the concrete goes. It actually goes out and in between some of the trees that's covered by so much leaves and debris and grass that they don't even know where it is. He said, and so it's not used as parking right now anyway, or even before it wasn't, because they didn't need it. And that would be the area, presumably, they wouldn't be cutting parking spaces back, but there's lots of spots that they could do and pull it back into straight lines. And a lot of their pavement really is driveway to get back to a corner for 3 spots or something like that. So that part was, they did address that, and they left it on purpose not to say remove a certain number of spaces, to leave that up to the developer and the architect to determine. There was also the question about off-property parking, which is, of course, available in Old Town. And they also had discussion about whether or not some of that parking might be made available to other areas in the high peak demands, like in market days and/or other things. And they quickly backed off on that. They said, we don't want to commit the owner to having to share their spaces with others.
Right, 'cause I
in
don't
that
think
point,
they want
'cause
to.
they didn't want to go that route, so.
Yeah. Well, one thing you might consider is allowing the 60% as recommended by planning and zoning, but have a caveat in there perhaps to where if it creates a problem with planning, that they could come back and maybe ask for a variance for a little more if necessary for parking, that kind of thing. Anyway, it's, Bert, anything else?
How are we going to determine I mean.
You're not, because the plan, it's at very early stages, so like Alex is saying, even the architect has no idea. It's just a matter of, if you say no more than 60%, at some point, they may have to come back and say, we can't get everything we need with the building we have. And if they're not putting more impervious cover than is already there,
Yeah.
I don't see that as an issue
I know
myself.
this is not something we can do, but why not let them have the 70% if they put up the wainscot all the way around?
I don't know.
I mean, because they're going to be spending money doing this.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, it's going to cost them to do this. I don't have a problem with the 70%.
Well, it's your motion. So, it's written in such a way to where you have the option of going with planning and zoning, or making your motion with the 70% rather than 60 as recommended.
I like the one you came up with, let's go with the 60%, put that in the motion, and allow them to come back if they need to, what was that, a variance on that?
Yeah,
Would
that we would be amenable to
Okay.
allowing them to do what they need to do, because without knowing, this could cause a ripple effect on other things. But I agree with Alex, if there's plenty of space maybe available, if they can only get 62%, that we'd have a little leeway there, or they would, to come back and say, hey, we've done everything we can, but we can't squeeze 5,000 square feet
That's the motion
out.
I'd like to make.
Okay, which is 60%, but they would be allowed to come back with a variance if they need more
If they need
for
more, if it messes
reconsideration.
up the planning, yes.
Okay. Alex, is that agreeable?
That's agreeable to me.
Okay. Cynthia, anything else?
I'll just go with it. I just don't understand why we have to ask them to throw the caveat in. I think that they would come back anyway,
Yeah.
whether we threw the caveat in or not. Now we're opening the door for them to come back and tell us it's not going to work. To me, if it's not going to work, they'll come back and say it's not going to work. Can we have a variance?
Yeah.
That's, okay.
That's what I think.
All right, let me change my motion again.
Okay.
We'll stick with the original motion of 60%, with no caveat.
Okay, so you're.
As recommended by
and-
planning.
and
As the planning and zoning recommendation.
Recommend the 60%.
Yes.
And the cutoff lighting is
And the cutoff
required, is required by the lighting ordinance anyway, so that's kind of superfluous. But that would be it. You're approving, the motion is to approve the conceptual plan with 60% impervious cover and full cutoff lighting as recommended by the Planning and Zoning Committee.
Yes, sir.
You got that, Selena? Okay. You're good with that? Good. You're good with that? Okay. No other discussion being needed. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. So again, the motion was to approve the conceptual plan with the planning and zoning's recommendations of 60% impervious cover and cutoff lighting. Okay, number 8, discussion and action. And this is discussion and action on an ordinance authorizing the posting of a memorial roadway sign design designating Business Parkway as a Dare Memorial Parkway. So if we can get a motion and a second.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we discuss and take action on item number 8 as written.
We have a motion to discuss as written. We have a second.
I'll second.
So we have a motion from Massey and a second from Buys to discuss and take action on item number 8, the memorial sign. So Cynthia, it's your motion.
Mr. Mayor and fellow councilmen, I was not here when this first came up and was discussed. And when I saw it on the agenda and then later I saw the results, I was a little disheartened. I think that this was a wrong move to put a sign, a memorial sign for an individual. He was only in Helotes as manager for 3 years. And I'm sure he was an amiable person. He did, again, the agenda item didn't say, it just said that he had done a lot for the community, but it didn't specify what exactly it was. Today I went to a funeral of a gentleman who was a descendant of a pioneer of Helotes who lived here pretty much his whole life and who for 40 years gave to the community with the Helotes Festival Association and other things. So I'm thinking, why does he not deserve a memorial parkway in his honor? The Helotes Festival Association, Carnival grounds are just down the road here. The Topper Wines, who used to own this property, they were here a long time and did a lot for the community. I can go back even further and talk about Justice Berner, who was a commissioner on the Commissioner's Court of Bexar County in the 19th century. He actually owned all this property before then, and he donated property to the first Helotes schools. There's a lot of people in Helotes who have passed away, who have done a lot more for the community if we're going to be naming things, but I think it was a wrong-headed decision to do this. And I mean no disparaging against the gentleman. I don't even want to say his name because I just think it's so wrong to talk about someone who can't even defend themselves. They're not even here, they're gone, to bring it up. I just think it was very wrong to do this. We had because a few councilmen thought he was a nice guy and he did a few things for the community. All of a sudden, we have to give him a memorial parkway sign. I just think that it was wrong to do that, and so I'm very much against this ordinance. And that's it.
Okay, Bert?
Okay. The reason this came back to council is because we needed an ordinance in order to have this, to get this done, right?
According to the transportation code that we included in here, the specialized highway signs,
Well,
yes.
I don't know if you remember the meeting, but I wanted to suspend this, or postpone it so we could find out what we really needed to do to get it done. And I'm glad this has come back up because I have never really felt good about doing this either. And for many of the same reasons that Councilmember Massey brought up. I knew Stuart really well. He was a good man, a very good man. But he wasn't a citizen of Helotes, and he was only here for 3 years. I went to the same funeral that Councilmember Massey went to today, and to me, a man like that, it's been with the community forever and ever and ever. He deserves maybe something like this, but not this. And what I'm really concerned about this, what's going to happen in the future if we allow this to happen? I mean, there's going to be more people asking for this. It could cause a ripple effect, and I'm glad this came back up because I'm not in favor of it either.
Alex?
Like Bert, I knew Stuart well within the short time that he was here. I do know that he supported a lot of the, several of the nonprofits areas, the kids, et cetera. Again, not unique to a lot of people in the community. When this first came up, the reason it came back is because when it was first brought up, it was worded in such a way as that it would be renaming the road completely, which would obviously create lots of issues and problems for businesses along that road. And not going to go through that part again because it's extensive, the list of issues that would cause. There was a lot of discussion at that time about him as an individual, but I agree that it does set a dangerous precedent that we could start renaming things or start having attachments. It's not unique to a community to do that, though. I don't know how you start it or where you end it. I thought this was more of a compromise to the original motion, to say that two members that actually happen not to be present tonight were the signers on the initial item, to bring it to council. And I have very mixed feelings about it. I really do. I completely agree with the points that were brought up here. I can also tell you that having this vote without the two present who signed for it is that's the part that gives me a little bit of, I know it's their own fault for not being here. I get that. So I'm torn on it. I think tonight I would have to side with the other two council members present and say this is not the right thing for us to do. Not do it for Stuart Adair, but to not set the precedent to do that for others. And if we do one, then we really do set a precedent that's very difficult to overturn or stop. And then we start offending when we say no later. So, thank you.
I think that, the recommendations that were put by staff, were good recommendations. I mean, if we're gonna be doing something like this, you have to have criteria. Why should someone have a street named after them, a memorial or whatever? And we don't have anything like that set up. And again, I agree with Councilmember Blue. All of us are going to have our favorite people. The next council who comes up, they're going to have some favorite person, and then they're going to put that person up, and someone else is going to get offended. Well, how come this person isn't up? And how come this, just like the names that I brought up. I just think that we're treading on really dangerous grounds with the community by doing this, and especially by the fact that this individual did not live in Helotes. What he did for the community was based on his job description. That's what his job was. Obviously he did a good job, but there's a lot of people in Helotes who do good jobs, and help the community. And it just so happens that this group, several people knew him more personally. I just think that that's wrong to use our position for something like this. So, anyway, I really am against this.
Bert, any follow-up? Alex? Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I would like to just remind council that our policies, it's easy to submit an agenda request item, but when they're submitted, as the original one was, without any backup material, the policies say that the council members who submit a request are responsible for their own work product, and that's supposed to include the desired action, the appropriate background information, fiscal information, and other information required for appropriate review. It had none of that. So if you remember that first meeting, we said we'd have to check the Texas Transportation Code. So staff spent many hours going through the Texas Transportation Code to put this information together for tonight. That should have been done, in my opinion, initially, and accompanied the original agenda request. So hopefully in the future, those kinds of things will happen, and we'll have full information to have a motion. I would like to remind council too that I believe it was 2009, we re-established a memorial fund, and you see the benches out front have memorial plaques on them, and we have other things. So people can donate to the memorial fund with a specific request to have a plaque for an existing bench or in the parks or something like that. So there are other ways that an individual like Stuart, and I think of Stuart every time I go into Walmart, and I miss him, seeing him there, because I remember the back and forth he and I would always have in there. But there are other ways to memorialize somebody in the city. Anyway, that being said, any follow-up for anybody? Then we would call the question. All in favor of approving, a yes vote will be to approve the ordinance, a no vote will be to deny the ordinance. So all in favor say aye. Opposed say nay.
Nay.
Did you vote nay?
said no.
Okay, so we have 3 nay votes, so the ordinance is denied. That being said, that's the extent of our agenda, so if there are no objections to adjourning, and I hear no objections, we are adjourned at 7:30.